us your full name,
Lamar Anthony Davis,
your work address, sir.
7919 Independence Boulevard, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 70806.
What agency do you work for?
Louisiana State Police.
Tell us what's your title or position.
Deputy Secretary, Department of Public Safety Services, Superintendent of Louisiana State Police.
Just give us a brief of your duties and assignment.
Provide safety to the citizens of Louisiana and visitors through enforcement, training, regulation, and education.
I'd like to bring your attention to the incident that took place on February 16, 2022 at the LSP Training Academy between former Cadet Blakes and Lieutenant Graham. How do you become aware of this incident?
It was reported to me through the chain of command, whereby they advised that an incident took place between Lieutenant Graham and a Cadet Blake at the time, at which point a recommendation was made and requested to initiate an administrative investigation. Upon receiving that information, initially I did a cursory review of that initial information, and I authorized that administrative investigation to be conducted.
What was the result of the administrative investigation?
Lieutenant Graham was sustained on conduct unbecoming, at which point I administered, along with the DRC, which is the Disciplinary Review Committee panel, administered discipline, 40-hour suspension.
Did you inform him of your intent to suspend him for 40 hours?
Yes, sir.
It's finished. We already introduced all these exhibits into, this is the appellee exhibit 4, which is almost the same thing as the joint exhibit 1.
You're introducing the same exhibit as joint exhibit 1?
I'm just asking, you told me to, if I'm going to.
Oh, you were just going to let me know it's already been introduced as joint exhibit 1. Gotcha.
All right. So this exhibit is already in there.
Got it.
Okay, thank you. What did you consider in making your decision about Lieutenant Graham?
Well, whenever we make these decisions regarding discipline, there's a host of things that we take a look at. We look at the evidence that's been presented, obviously, the investigation. We look at the circumstance of the incident. We look at prior discipline of the individual, prior discipline of that similar type action. Tenure, time, and experience of the affected trooper, in this case, Lieutenant Graham, among some other things.
What other evidence did you consider? Did you see any of the videos?
Definitely, as part of the evidence, I saw the video.
I'm sure that you are in the commission room, you saw some of the video as well.
Yes.
Did you saw a little clip or a complete surveillance video?
I saw portions of it. The portions that started off where there are no specific incidents, I did not look at that in its entirety. However, on multiple occasions, I viewed those incidents in question.
What did you conclude after you saw those videos?
I concluded that Lieutenant Graham did conduct himself in a manner that was unbecoming. Based upon what I saw, Lieutenant Graham conducted himself in a manner that, one, exceeded the point of training value. Two, he conducted himself in a manner that caused the agency to be looked upon in a certain manner. It impacted morale, as you've already heard from the cadets, as well as potential staff or staff. But you know, he also conducted himself in a manner that's less reflective of who he is. I've known Lieutenant Graham for many years through the military as well as through state police in multiple capacities. So I know of his capability. I also know of his high moral standard. However, in this particular incident, he did not conduct himself in that manner.
What action did you took as a result of when you made your decision?
Well, again, in consideration of the Disciplinary Review Committee, Internal Affairs came in, they presented their case. Upon looking at it, I looked at several factors. On the high end, we looked at whether or not a battery took place. we have to look at all avenues. And again, looking at all of the other things inclusive of his history, his discipline, and lack thereof, I decided not to go in that manner. I looked at the totality of circumstances with regards to what occurred with Dan Cadet Lake. And I settled on, again, conduct unbecoming. And that's where we sustained him on that particular policy violation.
Did you sign the suspension, the final letter?
Yes, sir.
And your decision was what? To suspend him for what?
40 hours.
Did you stand by that same decision as you stand?
I do. You know, unlike most, I have the unique experience to have trained in the State Police Academy twice and completed twice at the basic State Police Academy as well as the Trooper Academy. I have served as a defensive tactics instructor. I have served as a training and leadership instructor for the agency. And you know, when I look at all of that, and again, not just through that lens, but through other lenses and the lens of knowing Lieutenant Graham, I have to consider not only the individual incident. You know, when we consider discipline, we have to also consider the impact to the individuals that's involved, also the impact to the culture and the agency. And the thing that was disturbing to me was, one, we had already gone through an incident prior to that put us in a similar position. So everyone should have known this is not something that we're going to tolerate. It's not something that we should conduct ourselves in that manner. And I think that was very frustrating. So that's why I settled on, again, 40 hours.
Colonel Davis, as I'm sure you're aware, you've been sitting in this whole time. I represent Lieutenant Russell Graham. My name is Marion White. I have a few questions for you.
Yes, ma'am.
So, did you review any of the audio recordings of the witness interviews as part of your decision making?
Yes, ma'am, I reviewed some of them.
Okay, do you remember which ones you reviewed?
Not at this moment. I review quite a bit of audios and such, but not at this moment.
Okay. And you said you watched the video surveillance footage of the incident, pool incident?
Yes, the multiple incidents, not just the grabbing of the neck area, but also the repeated pushing, and that also played a part in my decision making.
Okay, but you didn't watch the entire morning workout from beginning to end?
No, ma'am.
And was there any, did you watch what we have viewed today, where there's no audio?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you agree with me that the suspension letter that issued to Lieutenant Russell Graham includes a synopsis of some of the witness interviews, but not all?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and would you agree with me that that some of the witnesses that did have more favorable or positive opinions of Lieutenant Graham and his interactions were not included in the suspension letter?
Not in the suspension letter, however, it was communicated during the briefing from Internal Affairs.
Okay. For example, Sergeant Borcherding, do you have the, you don't have it in front of you. I want to show you the suspension letter. that letter, if you'll turn to that, and at the bottom, the last paragraph, it begins to talk about Sergeant Borcherding. And that paragraph, would you agree with me that it doesn't make any statement about, or that Sergeant Borcherding felt like your actions were not inappropriate? I mean, Lieutenant Graham's actions were not inappropriate?
Based upon this paragraph, that would be correct.
Okay, and I can point you to the IA report on page 15 where Sergeant Borcherding is quoted as saying that he felt like Lieutenant Graham's actions were not inappropriate. If you would like for me to, or if you want to stipulate that that's what he says.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that yes, there's a stipulation?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, I want to look at, with you in the suspension letter, in reference to Captain Slayton, and that is on page 4. If you'll look at that, that's the second to last paragraph on page 4.
I thought we already stipulated that.
Slayton,
Yes.
I'm sorry. Let me double check.
Clayton, you stipulated, so
Thank you.
number 11. On the first
The first one,
sentence.
the first stipulation. The first one.
Okay, sorry,
All
I
right.
apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So, going back to the opinions, you would agree with me, would you not, that out of the 30, I believe it's 37, it was testified, it was over 35 witnesses, that the opinions on the interaction between Lieutenant Graham and Cadet Blake varied between some of the witnesses felt like it was appropriate and some of the witnesses felt like it was inappropriate. Would you agree with me on that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so what I want to know is, why were, it appears that the favorable opinions were not considered in the decision to suspend Lieutenant Graham.
Speculation?
Yes, I think she's asking a question. Well, ask it as a question.
Okay.
Okay.
Were those favorable opinions not considered in the decision?
All of them were considered, and again, as I mentioned before, when we look at discipline, we look at all of the facts, all of the evidence, and all of the information that's being presented. You know, when you look at whether it be workplace violence, battery, and all those other things that we considered, we looked at the totality of circumstance, and that was part of that totality, and that's why I did not go as high as I could have, or with discipline. So that was considered, yes, ma'am.
And just prior to this incident, had you not selected Lieutenant Graham to attend an FBI National Academy?
Objection, relevancy?
I agree. Suspend.
Did you review Lieutenant Graham's personnel file in making the decision to suspend him for 40 hours?
I consulted with Internal Affairs regarding this personnel file, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And did you review his performance evaluation?
Not his performance evaluations. However, I did consult with his chain of command, who provided summary of his performance.
Okay. And did you consider that there were no written guidelines in place with respect to cadet instructor interactions?
Yes, ma'am, that's always a part of my consideration as far as enhancing our agency, our training, and every aspect of it. So Yes, ma'am, that was considered, that we did not have anything specific, but when you look at our job, there are multiple areas of our job that does not have a specific policy for everything that we do. There is an expectation based upon training and capability for us to perform our duties in a professional manner. And that's what we consider as well. We consider, as I mentioned before, his tenure, his training, his experience, his education, and things of that nature.
Did you consider progressive discipline instead of going straight into discipline, but counseling or letter of reprimand?
A part of the incident that we consider is also egregiousness. And when we look at the level of egregiousness, when we're looking at multiple times of him placing his hands on a cadet, another employee, that was considered. So yes, ma'am, I did.
That's all I have.
I have a follow-up. Kind of use the word totality of circumstances. What is the best practice in a situation whereby a cadet is not performing the goals?
Well, whether it be a cadet or anyone else, you know, I have a standard, and it's coach, mentor, train, and retrain. And that's the way I push our leadership. I don't care who it is, because when we look at that situation, when we start to implement those types of behaviors in the academy, that manifests in our interactions in the public. And that's the problem. So if we're going to change the behavior with the interactions in the public, and I mean, some of this is eerily similar to a situation that took place in the public where you have someone saying, please stop. And we're not. We cannot continue to afford to act in this way. Our communities nor our citizens expect us to act in this manner. So when we perpetuate that in the academy, then it manifests in our interactions in the public. And that's where safety and bad outcomes result. So again, when we look at totality of circumstance, those are all of the things we consider. And I have to consider as an agency head.
Do you consider Lieutenant Graham to be in leadership position?
Yes, sir.
Do you consider him being in the rank of lieutenant to be a leadership position?
Yes, sir.
Do you consider Lieutenant Graham being an executive officer, XO, as you're calling, in a leadership position?
Yes, sir.
Do you consider his role to be an important role within the agency?
Yes, sir.
That's all I have.
Commissioner Retain.
Colonel, how are you? I'll be quick because we are a full day here. Is it possible, I heard you use culture, and we all understand the culture is changing. The culture is changing everywhere, certainly in the state police, and I commend you for the changes that you're making. And we sit up here and we talk about it every month with you and those kind of things. But, you know, and I certainly haven't been through the state police academy. None of us have, other than Monty. But, you know, I've talked to a lot of troopers in the however many years, 7 years I've been here. And you are a paramilitary organization. You know, there is that drill sergeant type mentality. I've never been through it, but I can equate it to high school sports. You know, when the coaches grab you by the face mask and when you're not doing what you're doing to train you around. When we were all growing up, that was pretty common. Now it's, you know, unheard of. Is it possible lieutenants caught in a culture change where you're going from pushing cadets and, you know, same thing, you know, lifting weights, you know, doing a bench press, you got 2 more in you, being lazy, come on, push it out. The same type of things on a long distance run, you know, when they're walking instead of running, you want to quit, otherwise keep going. Is it possible that the culture's changing to where things that, again, and I'm not getting lost in the written policies, I don't understand how you have a written policy for everything, but the understanding of how the people trained in the academy has to change because the culture's changing, and it just hasn't affected. It hasn't affected. It hadn't come down to everyone to understand that style of teaching. It's a question I've been sitting here thinking about since I started reading this, because things are changing, and I think we all recognize that. But
You know, given what has occurred to our agency in the past 3+ years, we are now we're undergoing a DOJ investigation. I have a top to bottom assessment being conducted of our agency. So there is no doubt, on top of that, we had a similar incident prior to this incident, which resulted in cadets being physically harmed and having to go to the hospital. There is no mix-up as to how we're to conduct ourselves, and I made that clear to the academy staff upon taking this position. So there was no question about how we were going to conduct ourselves, and that's exactly why we're moving to an adult learning model at this particular time. I expect, and I will hold all of our personnel as they will hold me accountable for our actions. Okay? If they have questions, they are free to call, text, communicate with me, tell me what they like and don't like. But they are to perform themselves or perform their duties in a professional manner. And that there's no in between when it comes to that. Because of these things that we carry on the side of our hips, it changes the whole outcome of a potential situation. So we don't have the opportunities at times to say, oops, my bad. We have to change things rapidly, we have to be intentional, and we have to be accountable. And that's what I expect of all of my people, as they expect of me.
I understand. But I guess, back to my question, you, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're pushing people both emotionally, mentally, and physically in the academy to breaking points to make sure, number one, you're weeding out people that can't mentally or emotionally or physically handle it. Is that a fair statement?
Not anymore.
That's what I'm saying, not anymore. But let's say like when you went through, or some of these other people in the audience that are troopers went through, it was different then, correct? I'm not saying right, wrong, or indifferent, I'm saying it was different.
It was different then, but again, we're talking about cadet class 100, not cadet class 76.
Sure.
So things had already changed.
I guess that's the hard question. When did things start to change? Because that's where my question is. When things are changing, you know, and I think you answered it to a stage where you said they understand what's expected out of you. What I'm just trying to make sure is, you know, what's coming from the top to everybody at that academy that's training is not necessarily a written policy and procedure, but they understand we're not doing X, Y, and Z anymore. We're replacing that with A, B, and C.
I made that clear upon us having that academy class.
Okay. That was my question. I appreciate your answer.
Yes, sir.
Any more questions?
I'll pass on the questions I had.
Return to your chair.
I can't believe it.
Yeah, I don't think they're gonna let you.